What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? Today we're going to be discussing this Dr. Craig video where he seems to go into the idea that atheism means that life is pointless. Here's a little clip.
Is there no reason for life? If its destiny is a cold death in the recesses of outer space, then the answer is yes, it is pointless.
So yes, we're going to be responding to Dr. William Lane Craig today on why atheism doesn't mean that you have to have like some kind of absurd existence or some. Atheism doesn't entail all that. We'll cover it here in a minute. If you're interested in this, then please stay tuned.
Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? In the name of progress, modern man has tried to answer those questions without reference to God.
Why do these particular questions really have to play into the God question at all? I mean, I really don't think God dictates any answer to those questions. Like, even if you're a religious person, I don't think that God has anything to do with those questions.
But the answers that came back were not exhilarating, but dark and terrible.
Well, it's dark and terrible for him. In his subjective view, it's dark and terrible because the answer that comes back is that, you know, we don't have some kind of special purpose in the universe. We don't have some kind of ultimate objective or absolute meaning in this life. We don't have to have those things in order to have meaning. But for Dr. William Lane Craig, as well as other Christians like him, he needs heaven and God to be real in order for this life to actually have meaning in it. While on the other side of things, on the atheist side of things, on the secular side of things, you don't look to God for meaning or purpose or anything like that. You find your own purpose. You find your own meaning in life. For these Christians, they need God to exist. They need heaven to exist in order for anything to make sense for them.
You are the accidental byproduct of nature. There is no reason for your existence. All you face is death.
And again, this is a rather bleak look on the atheist view on life. I like how the Christian here, who's never been an atheist, who's looking at these questions or this particular topic through Christian lenses, they seem to know a hell of a lot about how the atheists view life. Like, do the atheists really view life as being bleak? Because that's not been my experience. My experience hasn't been focusing on the fact that death is waiting at the end of my particular narrative, and then there's nothing after that. Like, that's not what I'm focused on. And I would venture to say that most atheists don't focus on their death all the time and how there's nothing after this life. If anything, removing God from the equation, removing God from the situation makes you focus on this life even more, makes you value this life even more. For William Lane Craig to sit here and act like atheists just have this very bleak and dark look on life, it's just rather absurd.
Modern man thought that in killing God, he had freed himself from everything that repressed and stifled him. Instead, he discovered that in killing God, he had unwittingly killed himself.
Okay, so there are a couple things going on here. First of all, there's the argument that atheists just want to sin, or they just want to not be restrained by any kind of moral system. That's pretty ridiculous in of itself, because atheists aren't atheists because they just want to sin. For one thing, they don't believe in sin, or at least I know I don't. Sin is a very religious concept. But to suggest that atheists throw away the shackles of morality to be able to do whatever they want is just ridiculous. And then at the very end, he throws in a very vital concept to religion in general, and that's coupling God, or the existence of God, or God as an entity, with yourself. Because he says that atheists killing God, which you got to exist first in order to kill it. You got to exist within reality, to be able to kill something. So atheists didn't kill God. God is still very much a concept that is alive today. To associate killing God or rejecting God or dismissing the idea of God as killing yourself shows how deeply coupled William Lane Craig wants this concept to be for every single believer out there. He wants you to feel like the God concept is coupled with your own personality, your own identity, to the point where if you reject him, you're killing yourself. That is some manipulative shit.
For if God does not exist, man's life is ultimately absurd.
And that's just an absurd fucking statement. We're only a minute into this video. Just because God doesn't exist doesn't mean that your life is absurd. That's a ridiculous notion. For one thing, rejecting the idea of God or dismissing the idea of God as being a viable option, those things don't have to mean that your life no longer has meaning. You have to find your own meaning in life. And that's exactly what I did. When I realized that I was an atheist, I found my own meaning in life. I no longer had to define myself in terms of this God. And that's a very freeing thing. At least for me it was. It felt like a weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. I no longer had this perfect deity to live up to. I could be flawed and it would be okay, which I know that Christians, they also teach that it's okay to be flawed and that everybody falls short of God. I get that they teach this, but they still have this perfect idea that you have to live up to. And if you don't live up to that idea, then you're just a total shit pile that needs redemption from my rapist. Well, that's what God is. I mean, he raped Mary, basically. He told her that, she was going to bear his child, whether she wants to or not, kind of thing. So I don't feel like I need to beg for forgiveness from a absolutely hideous creature that God seems to be.
If God does not exist, then man and the universe are inevitably doomed to death.
I don't see a problem with this. I don't understand why the idea that we're all going to dissipate in the heat death of the universe, like the universe is going to end at some point. That's like saying that it's totally bleak to admit that milk is white or that computers exist. Those are totally fucking bleak things. Stating facts are not just bleak in and of themselves. He thinks it's bleak because he can't imagine a universe without heaven and God. That's his subjective view on it. Meanwhile, we're over here, the more rational people, the people that look at reality and realize, well, just because the universe is going to experience heat death in a very, very long amount of time, like billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of years in the future, just because that's going to happen, it doesn't mean that our lives now are bleak or without meaning or purpose.
Like all biological organisms, man must die. His life is but a spark in the infinite darkness, a spark that appears, flickers, and then dies forever.
Well, yes. I mean, if you want to put it in a certain perspective of time, then yeah, human lives are very, very short. It only makes this life even more significant. You see, Christians often think that it goes the other direction, that it makes this life bleak and that it's meaningless. They don't consider the fact that knowing that there's no afterlife, knowing that there's no, or thinking at least that there's no God or afterlife, that puts even more of an emphasis on this particular life. And they always get this concept backwards. Because for them, for William Lane Craig, the other Christians, heaven and God are the end goal, where they will just never die. They will never expire. And that really boggles my mind, to be quite honest. Really, it should be them thinking that this life is meaningless. Like, this life, compared to an eternity afterwards, this life is nothing for them. It seems to me like that without God, without an afterlife, without an eternity, this life would infinitely increase in value.
Scientists tell us that the universe is expanding, and as it does so, it grows colder and colder. Eventually, there will be no heat at all. There will be no light. There will be no life. This is not science fiction. If God does not exist, then we are inevitably doomed to extinction.
Well, no, we're inevitably doomed to extinction regardless of whether or not your particular concept of God exists. So I don't understand why you think that your particular God is special in this respect. Like, there are plenty of other gods out there, so I don't know why your God has to exist or else everything is meaningless. But also, the scientific fact that you rattled off there, regardless of whether a God exists or not, that's still going to happen. And you can't definitively say that after this life there's a heaven or a God waiting. There's no way that you can know that. You can only, philosophically infer that using bad arguments.
Now, what does all this imply? It means that life itself is absurd. It means that the life we do have is ultimately without meaning, value, or purpose.
So I have a lot of meaning in my life, like doing my best to be the best father that I can for my son. That's one meaning I attribute to my life, being a good father. There are plenty of other people out there that find different meanings for their life. Another meaning or another purpose that I have given my life is to build a community for you heathens out there, to educate you guys on different philosophical arguments as well as scientific arguments against apologist bullshit. Exactly like this. These are things that I have come into myself. I haven't looked to a God to get those particular purposes and meanings. You give yourself meaning. Even William Lane Craig has given himself a meaning and purpose in this life. Just because he found it in an old book doesn't mean that he got it any differently than I did.
5 minutes.
If each individual person passes out of existence when he dies, what ultimate significance can be assigned to his life? His life might be important relative to certain other events, but if all of the events are ultimately meaningless, what can be the ultimate significance of influencing any of them?
So he seems to be going the route of equating atheism with nihilism here. Just because all life is going to stop existing at one point, or there's going to be a heat death of the universe, then nothing we do matters. This is more akin to nihilism. Atheists are not nihilists necessarily. There are some nihilists that are atheists, but I would say that nihilism is a completely separate thing than atheism, and atheism does not lead to nihilism. Christians get this wrong quite often, and this is probably the reason why they head for that, well, if God doesn't exist, then nihilism. Because obviously to them, nothing matters if God's not at the end of the race, waving the fucking flags and shit, cheering them on to get into the gates of heaven. But I'm standing here showing you that as an atheist, you don't have to go directly to nihilism. You find your own meaning in life. And just because William Lane Craig or other Christians out there say that you have to have God in order to have purpose, I'm telling you that you don't. He's making a jump without any kind of supporting information to make that jump.
Mankind is thus no more ultimately significant than a swarm of mosquitoes, for their end is all the same.
Well, I think it's all about perspective. On the perspective of like a mosquito's lifespan, it would seem pointless to us, but their point in life is to survive and to feed off people like lawyers. But you see, for William Lane Craig and Christians like him, there needs to be some kind of end goal for all this. And so they can't knowingly find that goal themselves. I really don't see the point in shifting your perspective to such a grand scale when this life is the only life that you have. You need to make this life mean as much as you can. And this is a common view among atheists, to focus their efforts on bettering their community and bettering the individuals around them. Not everybody, of course. There are a lot of people out there that are selfish, that do bad things or evil things just for their own self-pleasure. These type of people exist regardless of religion. They exist in religion and outside of religion. So, it's really just a human trait.
This is the horror of modern man. Because he ends in nothing, he ultimately is nothing.
This is not true at all. This rather bleak look on life is propaganda to get you to believe in God, or at least get you to think that you need God in order to have some kind of meaning to your life. This is manipulation on an apologist level.
But it gets even more distressing. For if life ends in the grave, it makes no ultimate difference whether you live as Joseph Stalin or as a Mother Teresa. If your destiny is ultimately unrelated to your behavior, then you may as well just live as you please.
I like how it ended there with the guy like breaking into a car, as if a sign of like, without God, everything is just chaos and everybody's just doing whatever they want to do without any kind of moral regard for anything. It's quite funny because Christian apologists often go this route, saying that without God, there's no morality or there's no standard with which we can judge our behavior off of. He throws in destiny there, like our destiny doesn't matter, like whether or not we do one thing or another. As far as the perspective that he's going with here, the heat death of the universe or the end of our lives, yeah, we're all still gonna die, but also it's not about the ending. When has a movie ever really been about the ending? Or when has any narrative been about the ending? Right? I mean, it hasn't been. I mean, the ending's part of it, sure, but it's the story that's told along the way that's important. It's the story that is told where all of the meaning and purpose happen. To shift your perspective so far back that you can only see the end of your life, that's not productive, but it also vastly misrepresents what this life means to us, especially as atheists. Also, I feel like he's about to go into the whole without God, there's no moral foundation or anything like that. Of course, we all have our own foundations in morality. It depends on where you grow up, even what area of the country that you're born in. Because I have a moral standard that's different than somebody living somewhere else in the United States. So it really all depends on where you grow up, how you grew up, and who taught you what was good and bad, until you can reach the age where you can try to discern what is good and bad for yourself. And then you start developing your own moral compass. So regardless of what William Lane Craig is saying here, he has developed his own moral compass just like you have and just like I have. Except he found his moral compass, or at least the basis for it, in an old book. We had to do it the hard way and figure shit out for ourselves, which ends up being the better way, in my opinion.
Moral values are either just expressions of personal taste or else the byproducts of biological evolution and social conditioning.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's what our moral compass is crafted out of. I mean, without biological evolution aspect of it, as well as the societal evolution and the need for structure in societies, we wouldn't have developed a moral compass. It's because of these things, because of how societies are shaped, we have developed these certain moral compasses. And like I said before, everybody's moral compass is different from everybody else's, and the general moral compass of a single nation is going to be different when you traverse nations. So I don't know why he thinks this objective moral foundation actually exists when morals have changed over the time frames. Like over the last 100 years, our moral compasses have changed drastically. So I don't understand how he can sit there and honestly say that he has the absolute moral foundation as revealed by God. Because even God's moral foundation has changed significantly over the past hundreds of years.
Who's to say whose values are right and whose are wrong? Now think of what that means. It means that it is impossible to condemn war, oppression, or crime as evil. To kill someone or to love someone is morally equivalent.
It's funny to talk about moral equivalence when all sins in your particular book are considered equivalent. Me murdering a motherfucker is the exact same as me stealing whatever the fuck from a store. For you, those sins are the exact same. You have no nuance in your particular religion for that particular subject. It's just really ridiculous how he seems to think that we have no moral foundation with which to judge good and bad off of. He says evil. I don't think evil exists. Evil is more of a religious word. Good and bad, right and wrong, Those are all very subjective, even in a Christian worldview. What's right to some Christians could be wrong to other Christians. Homosexuality is just fine with progressive liberal Christians, while it is completely wrong to other Christians out there. More conservative, right-wing, kind of traditional Christians out there, they're going to see that as wrong. Even in your own religion, you can't agree what the moral foundation is, so I don't know why you think it's fucking absolute or objective.
Our predicament is that it is impossible to live consistently and happily with such a worldview.
It's really not. I do it every single fucking day. He seems to be confused by the idea that you can both be a good person and be without God. Sure, it's confusing for him, but, what the fuck ever.
The atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell held that moral values are simply expressions of personal taste. And yet Russell admitted that he could not live that way. He therefore found his own worldview, and I quote, incredible. I do not know the solution.
Okay, good for Bertrand Russell. I really don't give a fuck what Bertrand Russell thought, because I'm my own person who has developed my own ideas on this particular subject. And yeah, while morality is subjective, and we change our moral compasses all the time, that is a sign of progress. Just because our morals are malleable doesn't mean that they're malleable in the wrong ways. It's obvious if you take a grand look at the timeline of humanity, the evolution of societies, you can see our morality progressing farther and farther along, still being malleable at every single point in time. We develop it for the utmost good of a society so that society can flourish, so that humanity can flourish. That's how our moral compass has trended. I get that you're confused because other atheists out there have pointed out how they're confused by something. Just because they are doesn't mean that we all are.
Confessed. If death stands with open arms at the end of life's trail, then what is the goal of life? Is there no reason for life? If its destiny is a cold death in the recesses of outer space, then the answer is yes, it is pointless.
No, it's not pointless, because we all find our own meaning in life. I know I've harped on this the entire time, but Craig has really repeated himself throughout this entire video. Where is the meaning? Where is the purpose? Well, I'm here to tell you that you find your own purpose, you define your own meaning. And just because it's all subjective, that my meaning is different than your meaning, that we all have different meanings and purposes in life, just because they're different doesn't mean that we can't have them. Just because we don't all have the same meaning, meaning what Craig thinks here, and that's to praise God and suck his holy dick. Just because that's not everybody's meaning doesn't mean that life is pointless. This would be like a false dichotomy, because he's only presenting two options. Either there's God and meaning to life and purpose to life, or there's no God, no purpose, no meaning, just ridiculous absurdity is what he's claiming. This is a classic false dichotomy, and it's not convincing to me, and it shouldn't be convincing to you.
We need to wake up and understand the gravity of the alternatives before us. If God exists, then there is hope for man. But if God does not exist, then all we are left with is despair.
Ha! And ending on Pascal's wager. At least I think, he's got about 40 seconds left. I don't know what he's going to say, but this is Pascal's wager. Either God does exist and there's an eternity of happiness waiting for us, or God doesn't exist and there's nothing. It's better to believe in God because there's happiness afterwards if there is a God. So it's better to do that. This is, again, a false dichotomy, and it just shows how ignorant he is of statistics in general. Basic statistics disproves Pascal's wager. Pascal, he kind of sequestered his whole argument between atheism and Christianity, but that's not really indicative of the entire picture, because we have so many other religions out there that claim to have the ultimate truth. That, Islam is the perfect way to heaven and God. That Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, all of these other isms out there. Well, what if some crazy guy on the subway has the actual correct version of God, and he's just riding the subway now, not telling a single fucking soul out there, so that we're all going to hell? All of those things are equally possible because there's no evidence for any of them. At least there's not any good evidence. Like, there's not any good evidence for the God of Christianity. There's not any good evidence for the other religions. There's nothing that actually supports the conclusion for those particular religions. So if you really think about it, statistics in mind, what you have is a choice between atheism, which is at the 50% mark, and then for the other 50%, it's subdivided amongst all of the other different religious ideas that are out there, each one having a specific criteria that you have to meet in order to get to heaven. Atheism is vastly more probable than any one religion that's out there.
Faced with an atheistic worldview, the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre realized that life is absurd. In his play, No Exit, he tragically portrayed the life of man as hell. The final words of the play might serve as an atheistic mantra. Well, let's get on with it.
You know, Dr. Craig, I don't think that you would know an atheistic worldview if it slapped you off your bike and made you taste the color purple. But I also don't care what some philosopher said in one of his plays or anybody said in there. I really don't care about the number of different quotes that you can pull up, because those particular quotes don't have an effect on how I came to my conclusion. They don't shape my ideas around anything. They don't mean anything as far as it concerns me and the way that I view life. So bringing those up really don't help you whatsoever. You're just bringing these things up to convince your already convinced audience that they are still correct. That atheism is pointless, it's meaningless, it means that nothing matters and all this other stuff, and just a bleak look on atheism. But I'm here to tell you that that is patently fucking wrong. I hope that you heathens enjoyed this video as much as you could today. If you will, please go down below, leave me your thoughts on William Lane Craig and his arguments against atheism in this particular video. Let me know what you think. While you're down there, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe if you want more videos like this. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice, and I will see you heathens later.